Hi everyone, I'm Shane Stevenson, Director of Museum Collections and Curator here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And for today's video, we are going to be talking carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Alright, kind of the food delivery system on board our three ships. Alright, so we do have very disparate ships here with very different food delivery systems. Alright, USS The Sullivans, our Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Little Rock, our Cleveland-class / Galveston-class cruiser, and then of course our USS Croaker, Gato-class, converted into an SSK in 1953. Alright, so a little bit about the food delivery systems and the flow before we start taking tours of all of the areas. Alright, so obviously when a ship is leaving through the supply division, the S division, right, and then there's obviously at-sea replenishments, usually once a month, where they're restocking the ship, not only with food, but with fuel and oil and crew and everything the ship needs to survive another month. Alright, but we're going to be taking tours through galleys, through pantries, through the Admirals' quarters, through Cpo. Alright, so you're going to see a lot of different spaces, and I'll be talking about how they would get the food to the crew that were on board. One thing I'd like to mention is that for the enlisted crews, they didn't have to pay for their food, but it was required that officers would pay for their meals. Alright, so that's the difference between the enlisted crew and the officers. Also, officers could have guests. Right, they can bring a guest from the existing crew, or if they were in port and having visitors come visit from shore. Right, enlisted crew couldn't have guests eating or dining with them. So for USS The Sullivans, we're going to take a look at the galley, and again, talk about the food delivery system to the different areas for the crew. So we're going to step into the vegetable peeler locker, or the spud locker, and that will be our first stop. Now I'm standing in this small compartment, probably 6 feet long by 4 feet wide, and this was the potato locker, the spud locker, or the vegetable prep area. So I'm going to do a little scanning. There's not a lot of space in here, but we'll do a little scanning, and this is where all the vegetables were prepared to head right there, right aft through the bulkhead into the galley. So here's an example of a vegetable peeler. The USS The Sullivans was in service from 43 to 65, so I'm sure this is not a World War II kitchen instrument. Right, it was probably brought on in the 50s or 60s. But again, that would peel vegetables. And here's the rest of the space. We do have some colanders here for effect. And then that leads dry goods storage area here. We've decorated it out with an example of what you would see here when the ship was in service. Alright, so we've got flour, we've got beans, we've got eggs, sugars, other spices. And all of that would be used here in the galley. So we have 3 large vats for liquid products, like soup and sauces. And they would be drained through that piping system right down there that you see into the serving trays or the buffet trays to be taken down to the various galleys and pantries. Here's our mixer. Alright, so this would be where they would make bread and other wheat products, mixing for brownies or cake along with bread. Here are the griddles. Here's the fryer. And 2 ovens. There's another storage unit here for non-perishable cans and pots and pans. And you can see how that's been decorated out. Alright, so for ships like the Fletcher classes during World War II, the main galley that you see is where all of the hot food prep would be conducted and would be where all the food would be produced. This would then be taken 2 decks down to the Enlisted Mess, right, to the mess deck, into their steam line, which I will show you in a little bit. The food would also be taken to the Cpo Mess, and the food would also be taken to the officers' mess, or the wardroom. Now, attached to the Cpo Mess and the officers' wardroom was a pantry. Now, this pantry wasn't able to produce hot food like the galley was, but they would have snacks, fruit, vegetables, coffee, sandwiches available that could be made right in the pantry. But for any of the hot food, that would have to come from the galley and then be delivered to the pantry for final preparation. Now, officers would have a little more choice, and so that's a variety of food, and then that's where that pantry would come in handy to be able to make the food to order. Where for the CPOs and the enlisted, the other enlisted crew, they really didn't get a choice. So we're going to show you the mess deck for the enlisted crew. I'll show you the steam line. We'll also take a look at the officers' pantry, the officers' wardroom, and also the CPO mess and the CPO pantry. Again, food though, hot food, all produced here in the galley on the main deck. It might harken back to that great white fleet of ships that were constructed, say, 1898 to 1904, 1905. You know, the galley was on the main deck with windows, and the crew would come get the food, and they would have to go back to their berthing to actually eat. So this, the Fletcher classes kind of harken back to that, being with the main galley on the main deck, and then the food needing to be carried 2 decks down. So I'll show you the officers' pantry and officers' wardroom, so follow me. You're now looking at the officers' pantry. It's kind of in a weird spot. It's just forward of the CIC in the forward superstructure. But as you can also see, there aren't many appliances in here other than the freezer right there. So again, the food would come from the galley just aft of here, and then final preparation with the stewards would then prepare each officer's meal on china, and then that would be delivered just forward into the officer's wardroom. Now, if you've been here before, if you know anything about USS The Sullivans, we have converted the officer's wardroom into a Sullivan's memorial compartment. All right, maybe you've seen the video with Kelly Sullivan where she described some of the artifacts in this compartment. But while USS The Sullivans was in active service, this would have been the officer's wardroom. Would have had the large table in the middle with tablecloths and china. There would have been a sofa in here as well. And then during battle, this would be turned into the battle dressing station. So the chief medical officer on board would have set up here during battles to patch up and sew up the crew. So the food would have been delivered right through that door and brought in here for the officers. So again, this is where the officers could have guests, and they were expected to pay for their meals. Now I'm going to show you the Cpo Mess and their pantry. Follow me. So one deck below the main deck, just forward of officers' country and the 5-inch handling room that you can see on the tour, is the Cpo Mess and Pantry. Right? CPOs, Chief Petty Officers, are enlisted crew that have moved up to E7, E8, and E9. So they're Chief Petty Officers, Senior Chief Petty Officers, and Master Chief Petty Officers. Alright, so because they've been in the Navy for a while, to move up into that ranking, right, they are given their own private eating area. And so again, this is one deck down, so the second deck. So again, from the galley, the food would be delivered here. I'll show you the pantry, their little lounge area where they can take a break from it all. So here's the pantry. Again, the hot food would be brought down by stewards to here for final preparation. Now they also ate what the enlisted crew would eat. Alright, so they didn't have choices, say, like officers did, but it was a perk that they were able to have their own space to lounge and relax and to eat. But like with the officers' pantry, there was a freezer here, a refrigeration unit. And here's eating tables, benches, and a long table here for them to eat. And again, build camaraderie with their fellow CPOs. One thing I do like to mention here is this unit. Industry wonk as well, and the carrier here in Buffalo. So there was a couple liquid moving and venting air conditioning. This carrier then moved it in San Francisco, that there is a product from the carrier corp. Alright, well, enough about that. Let's head down one more deck to the third deck to take a look at the Enlisted Mess and the steam lines and how they delivered food to those 290 enlisted crew. So now again we're on the third platform, and this is the enlisted crew's mess. So as I mentioned, CPOs would be E7s, E8, E9s. This was for enlisted E1s through E6s. And again, with their conversion through the 50s and 60s, during World War II, there would have been 18 extra berthing spaces, 9 against the starboard hull and 9 against the port hull. And so those bunks and cots would be lifted up, allowing space for the crew to eat. And they would sit on the foot lockers of those sailors that berthed there. Alright, so that has been removed over time. And also the tables have probably been updated since World War II. They still have the lip on them to keep food from sliding off onto the decking. This was also a place for social gatherings like movie calls and other events. Alright, so when there was a movie shown on board, this could be one of the spaces that they would play a movie. Now I'll show you the steam line and the scullery, so follow me. So here's the ladder on port where the food in the buffet trays and the steam and serving trays would come down from the main deck. So there's 2 ladders here, being on the third deck we are. So the food would be carried down. You'd also have sailors in line ready to eat, and so they would have to be a little gentle as they were coming down the ladders, as they didn't want to be the ones to spill the food and potentially burn themselves or other sailors. We did have a unit here for the cups and bowls, and along the port interior hull would be where the trays are, and utensils, and a salad bar, and the ice cream machine. So for my research, the USS The Sullivans did not have an ice cream machine during World War II, based on what I've read and I've studied, but obviously they did get one probably in the 50s, maybe during the Korean conflict, or throughout the 70s. So that was a nice treat that they would be able to have that on board and not try and requisition some ice cream from other vessels or other ships. So here's the steam line. So food would come down the ladder, be placed in the steam line here. The sailors would grab their food, bring it into the mess deck to eat. Once their half an hour of eating time was up, they would come here to starboard. They would drop their tray off and their utensils off in the scullery. Also what I used to call the slop line, or pots and pans. When I was in college, I worked on the slop line, so I would work in a scullery when I was in college. So here's where you're washing. There's the washing machine, or the dishwasher, and then they would be brought right back out and to be placed on port for new awaiting sailors. And so once the trays were placed, here's the ladder that would lead back up to the main deck and back to their duty station. So on a Fletcher class, one main galley for all of the hot food. For E1s to E6s, there's the mess deck. The food would be brought down 2 decks, placed in the steam line, and they would get about a half an hour to eat. Hot food would also go forward on the main deck to the officers' pantry for final preparation, into the wardroom, and food would also be brought to the second deck to the Cpo pantry for then delivery to the CPOs E7s, E8s, and E9s. You can see, as with any destroyer, it's pretty tight here and not much luxury, so to speak, but that might change when we head up to USS The Little Rock. With a beam of about 66 feet, they have a little more space. So let's head up to the USS Little Rock and I'll show you around. Well, now we're on USS Little Rock in the Cpo Mess and Lounge. But I know I'll do a quick pan, but this is not what she looks like today, though it was when she was in service. This compartment, again, would have been for the CPOs, E70, 89, and this was their mess and lounge. Unlike the Fletcher class destroyer, the pantries that you heard about on the destroyer with the officers and the CPO now turn into full galleys. So they now can have their own food prepared, not just a pantry, but in their own galley. When someone comes aboard today, what they'll see is actually what we call the Cruiser Compartment. Right? This is where we honor all cruisers that were constructed in the U.S. Navy. Being the last Cleveland/Galveston, Providence, right? These being the last one in the world, we'd like to honor all cruisers because we have sailors from all different types of cruisers that come on board, saying that this is the closest ship to what they served on. And so over the 42 years that we've been open, people give us cruiser material unrelated to the Little Rock. So we opened up this cruiser compartment here in the Cpo Mess and Lounge is a way of honoring cruisers and cruiser sailors. But if we just head right across the passageway, you'll see the galley, and then we'll move forward to the enlisted mess deck. And so all of their food would be prepped here. It was very similar, though, to the E1's, the E6 mess deck. The food was very similar to that. All right, and then it would just be delivered right across this passageway, right into the Cpo Mess. Just forward of that is the enlisted mess deck. Now let's call this the E1 to E5. All right, mess deck, and this is where they would eat. I'll show you the chow line, and but this is where, again, movie calls would be had, and entertainment, and also then just eating. This is a much larger space than the enlisted mess deck on the Sullivans, because there was about, at those rankings, E1 to E5, there's probably about 800 of those guys on board, as opposed to 290, 280 on USS The Sullivans. So 3 meals a day with the mid-rats as well, the midnight shift. You would have food being prepared here all day, all night long. Certainly sandwiches, coffee, snacks, fruit, vegetables, things like that. Relish trays, vegetable trays. As petty officers, and so they're one below the chief petty officers at an E7. Well, they created their own little mess space and mess deck here in the enlisted mess, and that's right on the port side there. So I'll show you that. So there you go, there's the first class mess. And so they would have their own little dining area, separated from the E1s to the E5s. But this gives you a nice view of the mess deck. And again, for movie call or relaxation or entertainment, this is where it would take place. All right, well, this is very cool because we have the Sea Cadets on board, and it's the USS Sullivan's division. They've been in existence for about 45 years, and since they're having a drill this weekend, and so they are using the USS Little Rock Galley as it would have been to feed all of the kids that are here this weekend for the weekend drill. All right, so this gives you a little example. We've got the ovens, we've got the fryers, we've got the chow line here, and they're preparing it for lunch today.
We're not cooking it, we're making it. Yeah.
One of the cool things we have on display here, though, is this menu from 1976. All right, so this will show you the wide variety of food the E1s to E5s would have on board. So it lists the day and what's on the menu. Oh, grilled hamburgers and cheeseburgers. Tuesday, grilled hamburgers and cheeseburgers and hot dogs. What's on Wednesday? Ah, grilled hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and hot dogs. Thursday, I don't need to repeat that. Oh, but wait, Friday. We've got chili dogs and we've got fish. So yes, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats to make sailors happy and energetic. So now we're going to head up to the wardroom, and I'll show you where the officers would chow down. Okay, so also on the second deck of USS The Sullivans is the officers' wardroom, and that's where we are today. All right, so right behind me is their galley, and this is where the officers would eat. We do have a breakfast menu from the officers' wardroom that I'll embed into this video, But for now, they would eat on china, as with all the other officers' wardrooms, and they could invite guests. If they were in port, they could invite guests from the shore, or they could invite guests from the crew. And also, as always, they'd had to pay for their own meals, where the enlisted guys would not. All right, so I'll walk the camera around and kind of explain some things, so let's check it out. Well, here's some examples of china. Now, another company, I was talking about the Willis Carrier and Buffalo Forge. Another local company called Buffalo China made a lot of the china that was used on board U.S. Navy vessels. Here's their galley. All right, you'll see we've got a steward there standing at the griddles. And so this officer's galley goes back pretty far. And so behind the appliances that you're seeing on the other side would be where the mixers are and the ovens. As we had mentioned, the CPOs had their own lounge as well, but it was converted, as you saw, with the cruiser compartment. But here's the lounge for the officers. We do have it behind an installed bulkhead that would not have been original to the ship, but because of all the artifacts in here, this fake bulkhead was created with the plexiglass, so at least people can see in. So this is a place where they could play cards, just lounge on their sofas. And so we have an extra space here on board called the Admirals' Quarters. Right? Since USS Little Rock was a flagship, we also had to have a place where the Admiral would eat. So we'll head up to the main deck and we'll check that out. So one of the unique things with the USS Little Rock is that she was a flagship, which means the Admiral, when he would come visit the fleet, mostly in the Mediterranean, this is where he would stay. Right, so this is the Admiral's quarters. It has a conference area, it has berthing just up forward, and aft is the Admiral Galley. Right, so we're going to take a walk back there and describe some pretty cool things. Now, talking about the Admiral and the CO, or the captain, the commanding officer, a lot of times that they would just take meals, since they were catered to quite a bit, they would take meals right in their, say, at-sea cabin, or their in-port cabins, depending on if they were docked, maybe just themselves or the XO or other officers on a daily basis. So we also have the commanding officer's scullery back here as well, although it's through a bulkhead or two, but I'll be walking through there. There's also a hatch that led, we just saw the officer's galley. There's a hatch and a ladder that led right up to the Admiral's Galley as well. So this galley would have been able to accommodate, the Admiral himself and, 3, 4, 5 other people. But if he had a social gathering of, say, 15 or 20, they would use the officer's galley and then just through that ladder and the hatch in the deck, bring it right up to the Admiral's Galley to be served here in the Admiral's quarters. Let's take a walk. So here's the Admiral's Galley. Some of the appliances were removed, and it's in a little disrepair right now. It's not on the tour route, but you'll see that there's a fryer here, and the refrigeration unit. Probably some of these flat surfaces that may have been a fryer over there. All right, so this is where the meals would be prepared for the Admiral and his party, and then it would just be brought forward through the preparation room and into the galley, as you can see itself. Now this hatch is what I was just mentioning to you. Leads right down to the officer's galley. And so if he had a larger party, as I mentioned, the food, they could then wrestle the assistance of the officer's galley and then bring the food up that hatch and then lead it again right to the presentation or preparation area right here to be delivered then to the actual quarters itself. You do have, this was the scullery for the Admirals, quarters. And again, pots and pans, slop line, things like that. Now, if you watch the 1945, 2021 comparison video on YouTube, you see that I compare certain spaces from the 1945 Cleveland class configuration to what we see present day. Now I'm standing in the superintendent's office, the recently retired Senior Chief John Branning. But this was the CO's stateroom when the ship was in service and on active duty. All right, so a lot of times he would just, again, eat in his quarters or eat in his at-sea cabin. You know, the food would be just brought up to just after the pilot house where he was, or the Admiral's at-sea cabin, and which was 2 decks above the main deck. All right, but we also have a scullery here. So for the CO, his food would be prepared in the officer's galley, and then again, stewards would bring it up to this office 1 deck up on the main deck, and his scullery was behind this door here. So here was the scullery for the CO. There was like a little pantry as well. There's a fridge in here, and then the pass-through window right there. That would lead to the scullery that we saw for the Admiral's quarters. Right, but this is where some final preparations could be made, you know, for the captain's food. The captain's meals. As you can see, that would be his stateroom right there. So the food could just be easily brought, you know, the 6 feet into the CO's stateroom. So a lot of different options here on USS Little Rock. We have the officer's galley, officer's wardroom. We have the Admiral's quarters. We've got the captain's quarters. The enlisted, it never ends, does it? The enlisted, the first class petty officer galley or mess, and the Cpo Mess and Lounge and the Cpo Galley. Now for something completely different, we're going to head down to the USS Croaker, the Gato class converted in 1953 to an SSK, to see how they ate. And let's file this under now for something completely different. I am standing in officer's country of USS Croaker, our Gato class sub converted to an SSK in 1953. So we've gone from USS The Sullivans with about 310 men on board, crew and officers, to USS Little Rock with about 1,000 guys on board, probably 700, 800 of those enlisted. And then we have the Marine Detachment or MARDET attachment, the men's department, so to speak. And then you come on board to the Croaker where there'd be 75 to 80 men on board. You know, and of those, about 6 or 7 of them would be officers. And this is where they would live. And here is their pantry. All right, so we'll take a look at that. And again, pantries would be where the food goes through its final preparation, right? But as you can see in a minute, space is pretty tight. So the galley would make all of the food, and then it would be brought to the officer's pantry to then, for final preparation, to the wardroom. Now, as with other pantries that you saw on, say, USS The Sullivans, they would always have some fruit, vegetables, they'd be able to prepare sandwiches in this space for the officers. But for any of the hot foods, the breakfast, lunch, dinners, mid-rats, that would be prepared in the galley and then brought to the pantry here for final prep to be delivered right here to the officers' wardroom. All right, so this is where they would eat. This is where they would set the agenda for the boat, the orders and directives, and this is where the officers would also lounge and relax for a little bit. All right, so if we head aft, we pass their staterooms into the control room, past the boat's office, right there. And I will meet you very quickly in the mess deck. So for the last stop on our tour of supply, food flow on our 3 ships is the actual galley where the enlisted crew would eat. All right, there are originally 4 tables. We have 3 to give a little more space for tourists and visitors, but we do have the 4th table. We just haven't mounted it to the deck, and I think we might be doing that sometime soon. So this was the main galley on board where all of the food was prepared for the officers and for the crew. All right, we do have it decked out in food with some food, fake food items, but we do have a fryer, we have a griddle, we have the oven, we have a mixer. All right, so food was prepared on board a submarine. Food was prepared 24/7. And there would be 2 cooks and a couple stewards on board. And so one would be working during the day and one would be working during the night. So unlike our surface vessels that had very strict breakfast, lunch, dinner, mid-rats, main meals were cooked throughout the day and the evening on a submarine. And what's also been told is that submarines would always get the best cooks coming out of schools. All right, so usually the food, that was a little perk of being a submariner, was that the food was a tad bit above what you'd find on a surface vessel. Now we do have on display a copy of a Christmas dinner menu. Alright, so we've got cream of tomato soup, crackers, pickles, roast tom turkey, giblet gravy, oysters, lettuce, ice cream, fruitcake, French pie, creamed peas. So that's a fairly good meal. Alright, and I found a picture in the collection from 1962, and this Marilyn Monroe was here in the galley, so I decided to put her back up, and she's welcoming all of the submariners to their 15 minutes of galley time. So the reefer was where the perishables were stored. All right, it's like the cold storage. We do have it gated in the deck here, as you can see. And that leads to the discussion that food was stored everywhere on a submarine. Right, one of the most interesting things was that it was stored in the shower, in the enlisted head. So they would fill up the shower with food, and you didn't even shower until all the food was gone. And then you only showered about once every 2 weeks for about 45 seconds. So they shoved food everywhere around the sides in the interior of the pressure hull and down on the lower deck in the holds and pump areas. And we do have that on display a little bit with the, you'll see when you come on board, there's coffee cans everywhere. And so you'll see that. Right? But one of the most interesting things is the shower was filled with food, and then they would slowly work that down. Well, now I'm getting very hungry. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you are not currently a subscriber, please subscribe, ring the bell to get notifications. Obviously, please leave any comments in the comment section, and look out for more videos. Let's go grab a burger.